The English had learned to fight. Standing firm had become their strength. The shield wall was now their greatest weapon. But understanding did not come easily. The Vikings sought something more than battle. Sometimes negotiation was possible, or so the English believed. In the years between 800 and 810, a new strategy emerged. Diplomacy replaced warfare. Peace seemed possible. But the English would learn a bitter lesson. Negotiation was expected, but axes answered instead. This is the story of what happened when the English tried to talk to the Vikings. This is the story of what happened when diplomacy failed. This is the story of how one mistake changed everything. Let me take you back to the year 800. The shield wall had proven itself. English warriors had held their ground against the Vikings. Combat had shown them what they were capable of. But a hard truth had become clear. Warfare alone could not bring victory. The Viking threat kept returning, wave after wave. More ships would always come. More warriors would always arrive. More ambition would always drive them forward. There was no way to kill every Viking. A different strategy was needed. Some English kings began to consider negotiation. They thought about making peace with the Vikings. They considered paying tribute to stop the raids. They explored the possibility of treaties. They imagined dividing England into zones where Vikings could settle without threatening the entire kingdom. This represented new thinking for the English. It was a new strategy. It was a new approach to the Viking problem. Military force alone could not bring victory. They needed to find a way to coexist with the Vikings. They needed to find a way to live with the threat. The logic seemed sound. If the Vikings wanted treasure, why not give it to them? If they wanted land, why not offer them specific territories? If they wanted to settle, why not create zones where they could do so without threatening the entire kingdom? These were the questions that English kings asked themselves. These were the hopes that drove their diplomacy. These were the dreams that would soon be shattered. In 802, an English king named Cuthred of Kent decided to try something new. He sent an embassy to the Vikings. Messengers sailed across the sea to negotiate with the Viking leaders. Cuthred offered money and treasure. He offered the Vikings a chance to leave England peacefully in exchange for payment. Cuthred believed this would work. He believed the Vikings would accept. He believed they would take the money and go home. He believed this was a good solution. The messengers sailed to the Viking camps. They met with the Viking leaders. They explained Cuthred's offer, payment in exchange for peace. They offered treasure. They offered the chance for the Vikings to leave England with wealth and honor. The messengers were hopeful. They believed this would work. They believed the Vikings would accept. The Viking leaders listened to the offer. They considered it carefully. Some were interested. Some thought that taking the money and leaving might be wise. Some believed they had already taken enough treasure from England. Some thought it might be time to go home. The debate among the Vikings was intense. Some wanted to accept, some wanted to continue raiding. The division was real, but not all agreed. Not all were interested in peace. Not all wanted to take the money and leave. Some were hungry for more. Some wanted to conquer England. Some wanted to take everything. Some wanted to establish themselves permanently in England. Some dreamed of creating a Viking kingdom there. These ambitious Vikings had a different vision. They did not want to leave England. They wanted to own it. The negotiations broke down. The Vikings rejected Cuthred's offer. They told the messengers they wanted more than money. They wanted land. They wanted to stay in England. They wanted to establish settlements. They wanted to create a permanent Viking presence in England. The messengers were shocked. They had not expected this response. They had believed the Vikings would accept the money and leave. They had believed negotiation would work. The messengers returned home with disappointing news. Cuthred listened in shock. He did not expect this response. He thought the Vikings would accept the money and leave. He thought this would be a simple solution. He thought negotiation would work. But he was wrong. He was beginning to understand that the Vikings were not just raiders. They had bigger ambitions. They wanted to conquer England. They wanted to make it their own. In the years that followed, other English kings tried negotiation. They sent embassies to the Vikings. They offered money. They offered treasure. They offered land. They tried to make deals with the Vikings, but the results were always the same. The Vikings rejected the offers. They wanted more. They wanted to conquer England. They wanted to establish themselves permanently in England. The pattern became clear. Negotiation was not working. By 805, the pattern was undeniable. Negotiation was not working. The Vikings were not interested in peace. They wanted war. The English needed to prepare for a long conflict. But some English kings still held on to hope. They still believed that negotiation might work. They still believed that the Vikings could be reasoned with. They still believed that peace was possible. This hope would prove to be their undoing. In 806, a large Viking fleet arrived on the coast of England. The Vikings were led by a commander named Ragnar. He was a fierce warrior. He was a skilled commander. He was ambitious. He wanted to conquer England. He had heard about the English shield wall. He had heard about the English defenses. He had heard about the English resistance. But he was not afraid. He believed he could overcome the English. He believed he could conquer England. Ragnar was different from other Viking commanders. He was not just interested in raiding. He was interested in conquest. He was interested in establishing a Viking kingdom in England. He had studied the English defenses. He had learned about the shield wall. He had learned about English tactics. He had learned about English strategy. He had come to England with a plan. He had come to England with ambition. He had come to England to conquer. Ragnar landed his fleet on the coast. He brought his warriors ashore. He began to march inland. He began to attack English towns. He began to burn English settlements. He began to take English treasure. He began to do what the Vikings had always done. He began to raid and conquer. But this time something was different. This time, the English were ready. This time the English were ready. This time they had organized their defenses. This time they had prepared for this moment. When Ragnar's forces approached an English settlement, they found warriors waiting. They found warriors standing in formation. They found warriors holding shields together. They found the shield wall. The shield wall was waiting. Ragnar attacked. The English held their ground. He attacked again. They held their ground. He threw his warriors at the shield wall again and again. The shield wall held. They did not break. They did not run. They simply stood and fought. Hour after hour, the battle raged. The Vikings threw themselves against the shield wall. The English warriors stood firm. The battle raged for hours. Warriors died on both sides. Blood soaked the ground. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of shields, the screams of wounded men, the roar of warriors fighting for their lives. But the shield wall held. Again and again it held. The Vikings could not break through. The English could not be defeated. Finally, Ragnar realized he could not break through the shield wall. He realized that direct assault was not working. He realized he needed a different strategy. He decided to try something else. He decided to send messengers to the English commander. He decided to propose a negotiation. Ragnar knew that the English had tried negotiation before. Ragnar knew that the English still believed in diplomacy. Ragnar knew that the English might be willing to talk. The English commander agreed to meet with Ragnar. He agreed to hear what he had to say. He believed that perhaps negotiation might work. He believed that perhaps Ragnar might be willing to make a deal. He believed that perhaps peace could be achieved. The commander was hopeful. He was tired of war. He was tired of fighting. He wanted peace. He wanted to believe that peace was possible. Ragnar and the English commander met. They met on neutral ground. They met between the two armies. Ragnar spoke first. He told the commander that he respected the English warriors. He told him that the English shield wall was impressive. He told him that he did not want to continue fighting. He told him that he was willing to negotiate. Ragnar was a master of deception. He knew how to say what people wanted to hear. He knew how to make false promises sound sincere. The commander felt hopeful. He believed Ragnar was sincere. He believed peace was possible. He began to propose terms. He suggested the Vikings could have certain areas of England while the English kept others. He imagined a divided kingdom where both peoples could live without constant warfare. The commander spoke of peace. The commander spoke of coexistence. The commander spoke of a future where Vikings and English could live side by side. Ragnar listened to the proposal. He nodded his head. He seemed to be considering it. He seemed to be interested. The commander was hopeful. He believed this might work. He believed peace was possible. Ragnar continued to listen. Ragnar continued to nod. Ragnar continued to pretend to be interested, but Ragnar was not interested in peace. Ragnar was interested in one thing only: killing the English commander. But then Ragnar smiled. His smile was not a smile of agreement. It was a smile of deception. It was a smile that said he had been playing a game. It was a smile that said he had been buying time. It was a smile that said he had been waiting for this moment. The commander saw the smile. The commander understood what it meant. But it was too late. Ragnar stood up. He drew his axe. He shouted a command. Suddenly, Viking warriors emerged from the trees. They emerged from the bushes. They emerged from everywhere. The English commander and his small guard were surrounded. The Vikings had been waiting for this moment. They had been planning this ambush. They had used negotiation as a trap. The commander realized his mistake. He realized he had been deceived. He realized that Ragnar had never wanted peace. The commander understood what had happened. He had been deceived. Ragnar had never wanted peace. Ragnar had only wanted to get close enough to kill him. He had made a terrible mistake. But there was no time to regret. There was no time to think. There was only time to fight. The commander drew his sword. He prepared to fight. He knew he was going to die. He knew this was the end, but he did not run. He did not surrender. He stood and fought. He fought with courage. He fought with honor. He fought until he fell. His last act was an act of defiance. His last act was an act of courage. His last act was an act of honor. From a distance, the English warriors watched the betrayal unfold. They saw their commander fall. They saw the Vikings emerge from the trees. They understood immediately what had happened. Negotiation had been a trap. The Vikings had never wanted peace. The Vikings had used negotiation as a weapon. The Vikings had used deception as a tool. The Vikings had betrayed the trust of the English commander. Rage filled the English warriors. Fury consumed them. They were determined to avenge their fallen commander. They formed a shield wall. They prepared to attack. They charged at the Vikings with everything they had. The Vikings charged at the English. The two forces collided. The battle began. This battle was different from the earlier battles. This battle was fueled by anger. This battle was fueled by the knowledge of betrayal. This battle was fueled by the desire for revenge. The warriors fought with a fury they had never shown before. They fought as if possessed. They fought as if fighting for their very souls. The Vikings were shocked by the intensity of the attack. They were shocked by the fury of the warriors. They were shocked by their determination. They were shocked that the English did not run. They were shocked that the English did not break. They were shocked by the ferocity of the counterattack. The battle raged for hours. Warriors died on both sides. Blood soaked the ground. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of shields, the screams of wounded men, the roar of warriors fighting for their lives. But this time, something was different. This time, the English were winning. This time, they were pushing back the Vikings. This time, they were driving the Vikings back toward the sea. The English had learned their lesson. The English understood that negotiation does not work with the Vikings. The English understood that the only language the Vikings understand is the language of war. Finally, the Vikings broke. They realized they could not win. They realized they were being defeated. They needed to retreat. They fell back. They ran toward their ships. The English pursued them. The warriors chased them toward the sea. They drove the Vikings back to their vessels. Ragnar escaped. He managed to get to his ship. He managed to sail away, but many of his warriors did not escape. Many were killed. Many were captured. Many were left behind on the beach. Victory was theirs. They had defeated Ragnar's forces. They had driven the Vikings back. They had proven they could stand against the invaders. But the cost was high, and the lesson was bitter. They had learned that negotiation does not work with the Vikings. They could not be trusted. They would use deception. They would use betrayal. They would use any weapon, including false promises of peace. In the years that followed, this lesson remained burned into their memory. They became more cautious. They did not trust the Vikings. They understood that the invaders sought conquest, not coexistence. They prepared for a long war. They understood that the only way to defeat the Vikings was through strength. They understood that the only way to protect England was through vigilance. They understood that the only way to survive was through unity. By 810, the pattern was clear. The Vikings would not stop. They would not go away. They would not accept a peaceful division of England. They would continue to attack. They would continue to raid. They would continue to try to conquer England. The English understood this. They accepted it. They prepared for a long conflict. They knew that this was not a war that would end quickly. They knew that this was a war that would last for generations. They knew that this was a war that would define the future of England. The lesson of these years was bitter. Negotiation was expected, but axes answered instead. What the English learned in these years would shape the future of England. It would lead to the eventual unification of the kingdom. It would lead to the development of English resistance. It would lead to the eventual defeat of the Vikings. Everything began with a simple understanding. Negotiation does not work with the Vikings. They cannot be trusted. They will use any weapon to achieve their goals. Words are meaningless when axes are drawn. This is the truth that emerged from the ashes of Ragnar's betrayal. The story of these years was a story of learning. It was a story of discovering the true nature of the Viking threat. It was a story of understanding that some problems cannot be solved with words. It was a story of recognizing that strength is sometimes the only language that matters. It was a story of preparing for a long and difficult struggle. It was a story of a people learning to survive against an enemy that would not negotiate, would not compromise, and would not stop. In the decades to come, the Vikings would continue to raid England. They would attempt to conquer England. There would be great battles and great struggles. But the English would remember the lessons of these years. They would remember that the shield wall works. They would remember that they could stand together. They would remember that they could fight. They would remember that they must always be prepared. They would remember that negotiation does not work with the Vikings. They would remember that the only way to defeat the Vikings is through strength, unity, and determination. After the shield wall came the attempt at negotiation. After the attempt at negotiation came the betrayal. After the betrayal came the understanding. They understood that negotiation was impossible. Peace was not an option. They could only fight. They must be prepared for a long war. They must stand together. They must use the shield wall. They must be strong. They must be united. They must be determined. They must be willing to sacrifice everything for their kingdom. Negotiation was expected, but axes answered instead. This is the truth that the English learned. This is the truth that would guide them through the centuries to come. This is the truth that would lead to the eventual unification of England under a single king. This is the truth that would lead to the development of English resistance against foreign invasion. This is the truth that would lead to the eventual defeat of the Vikings and the establishment of a new England. And it all began with a simple lesson learned in blood and betrayal. When the Vikings come, negotiation is not an option. Only strength, courage, and unity can save you.